I am interested in asking you. Well, I'm interested in convincing you about something I call the egoist axiom and the consequentialist and determinist corollaries.
Okay, well let's go into it. I'm not an egoist. I think some
Well,
things
you're
that
about to be.
Sterner Sterner said. False principle of our education, by the way, amazing Sterner article. It's only a couple pages. Everyone should read it. If you really want to understand education and how, the capitalist class, whatever fucking bullshit, like how education is fucked. Read that. It's a great work.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. So it's actually interesting how I
I'm
figured this
sorry.
out.
I'm sorry
What?
I'm interrupting so much and so chatty. I'm
It's
sorry.
fine. It's fine. I know you like to talk. I know you're good at talking. You got lots to say, so that's fine. Um, okay. So basically, what we got here is the way I came into finding this out is because I was studying praxeology, and I was learning about inductive axioms, and praxeology is an axiom that you need to accept in order to get anywhere from man acts. Otherwise, you can't get to human behavior, you can't get to choices and reason and things like that. So the way I learned this is from praxeology, and I realized you can actually just make inductive axioms. Like you can do that. Now, the one thing that has to be true is people need to accept that the axiom's true in order for you to get anywhere. But if you make an axiom similar to praxeology, where man acts,
Yeah.
you have to make it
Yeah, I do this all the
undeniable.
time.
Yeah.
I do this all the time, right? So like when I'm dealing with the left in like debates and stuff, sometimes I'll ask them like, "Do you have can I rape you? Is it wrong to rape you?"
Yeah.
Right? And they go, "Well, no." And I'm like, "Okay, so you believe in bodily autonomy, right?" So
Yeah.
I'm not using that language, but what I'm doing is I'm skipping a whole part of like grounding,
Mm-hmm.
because if I can get them to agree that they have a right to their body and that they ought not be raped, we can just use that as an axiom and we can move forward from there. So
Yeah,
like
but
I
they're
totally
contradicting
agree with you.
themselves because their preconditioning axioms break their idea of bodily autonomy axioms. So they don't believe in bodily autonomy.
That's exactly, that's fine, but they're not going to say that,
No.
right? So like I can, right, and then we can work from there to show the cognitive dissonance where they don't where they realize that their other beliefs contradict their own belief, which is that they have a right to their body and that they ought not be raped, right? So like I don't need to go all the way to existence exists, or like the law of identity, or like performative contradiction, or like, ethical systems ought be conflict, reducing, or at the very least, not conflict inducing, right? Like, I don't need any of that shit. If I just start with, can I rape you? And they go, no. And then I go,
No.
okay, so do you believe in a bodily autonomy, like that you have a right to your body? Cool. Let's move on from there. I 100% agree with you that you can just make axioms. And like, so long as everybody agrees with the axiom, you can move on from there, as a form of argumentation or rhetoric. I don't know. That doesn't necessarily mean that the axiom is true. It just means that everyone is willing to accept it.
Yeah. No, fair enough. But basically that's how I discovered the egoist axiom. But so the egoist axiom is very simply this. Actions are driven by desires or preferences. So by definition, any voluntary action reflects what an individual chooses or values most at that moment. It's essentially
Well, I
Praxeology
mean, yeah,
101.
yeah, it's praxeology, just the theory of human action, right? All of them are rational actors, which means you act upon your desire. You act upon your desires, like regardless of what those desires are. People go, well, sometimes people are irrational. It's like, no, they make poor decisions. They have imperfect knowledge, right? But in that moment, it's irrational to smoke a cigarette. It's irrational for me to vape, right? It's irrational in the sense that it is an anti-life thing, right? But in this moment, I value not going through nicotine withdrawal. I value the kind of sharpness that nicotine gives me. I value the fact that I'm ADHD as fuck, and like having a hand to mouth thing, allows me to like focus and be centered. I value all of these things more than I value the potential down the road consequences of vaping. And I prove that with my actions.
Exactly, exactly. And
Mm-hmm.
if you accept praxeology, this is basically second nature to you. So the idea is
Yeah.
simply this:
Sorry, I was
So
doing
the
that
idea
more
of
for the audience than you.
no, that's fair. That's fair. The idea of psychological egoism is that you act selfishly. And if you look at this definition right here, and if you look at praxeology, what you'll realize is that you fundamentally act on your values above all others. You fundamentally act on your value. You do the things that you desire above all else.
I would agree with but I have an issue with the word selfishly only because of the distinction how I view selfishness versus altruism,
The negative
right?
connotations.
Right. Well no, the negative connotation of like I don't care about the negative connotation that normal people have with the term selfish. Right? I mean it in the sense that like if many people do act against their own rational self-interest because they value altruism, right? Which is and so they have deluded themselves into irrational thought and act against their own rational self-interest.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that is in my opinion the height of evil, right? To do something that is to sacrifice is the greatest evil man can commit.
Even altruism is done selfishly.
Right. It's right, but it is the logic to altruism is false, right? So I agree that they're
Yeah, it's
acting
bad.
according to their own values, right? I just say and so I agree with the concept in theory that all human behavior is selfish towards one's own values. But if those values are not in one's own rational self-interest, then those values are evil.
Exactly. You got the objectivist view
Mm-hmm.
right there. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's perfectly in line with objectivism, which is why I think objectivists really got it right. Well, Ayn Rand really got it right when she figured
You just
out
got to
that
be careful
idea.
using the same words that you got to be careful using the same words that they use with slightly different meanings, right? Because selfishness has a certain connotation in
Yeah, it does have a
objectivism
negative
that you're
connotation
using
to
in
it.
a broader. Well, it
Yes,
has a
yes.
positive connotation in objectivism.
Exactly, exactly. It does. Well,
Mm-hmm.
when you're specifically talking about rational self-interest, which is the when it comes down to selfishness, there's two types of selfishness. There's long term and there's short term. There's high time preference, low time preference. And so there's basically a distinction of intelligence. So morality is not even in the picture when it comes to rational self-interest. And that's why I think this gives it a more grounded presence in the pragmatic libertarian view, because you look at everything through the view of intelligence rather than morality. So if you do a crime or something like this, that is high time preference expedient behavior, and
Mm-hmm.
it's going to negatively affect you and everyone around you. But if you're an investor, if you eat healthy, if you work out, if you go to your job every single day, if you earn status, you have a low time preference and you are preferring investments towards the future, and you will benefit yourself and everybody around you overall.
So
So,
I kind of agree, but I have a slight disagreement, right? And the
sure.
slight disagreement is that there is a right choice. Okay. And what I mean by that is it is wrong to the concept of acting in your own rational self-interest to commit a murder um, based upon your low IQ and high time preference thinking. Right now, you may right like to rob a liquor store and kill the clerk. Right is morally wrong from an objectivist frame point. It is wrong because it is against your own rational self-interest. Now you may think at the time because you're low IQ or because your values are, are fucked up. Um, that you may think that it is in your rational self-interest because you lack knowledge, right? You lack the reasoning to recognize um that the behavior you're about to commit is going to have longer consequences that are against your rational self-interest, right? And so that's your intelligence in that regard and your commitment to pro-life um, values are going to increase the likelihood in which you correctly guess, right, or correctly rationalize your behavior into the correct position. But there is an objectively right and wrong answer, good or bad, to every decision that you make, but we're working off of imperfect knowledge. Now, I think people like Liquid Zulu and the more hardcore objectivists kind of like put this within the time frame of like, in that moment, the right or the wrong answer is not necessarily based upon the actual end consequences, but rather based upon, are you acting, in accordance to those values and in accordance to your own rational thought. And so many of them would say that it's not necessarily wrong to get it wrong, to guess wrong, right? And like, again, I'm not an objectivist, and like, and so this is getting a little bit out of my domain, right? And so I don't know that I can give you definitively answer one way or the other whether or not which of us is right in that regard. They may be right in that regard, but certainly it's not purely just like an IQ thing, right? Like there is a wrong decision there, and the wrong decision, the morally wrong decision, is to act in accordance with like high time preference thinking and like not consider the possible consequences of your action and how that's going to fuck you, and those you care about and the things you value in the long term.
Right, but that's because in the objectivist framework, what you call morality is in fact practical morality, which isn't morality at all. It's a type of consequentialism. It's outcome based, and it's based on the idea of...
How is it not morality?
It's not morality because, and this is why I hate the word morality, and I'm sorry, I'm going to go off a little bit. Morality is, I think it is like a real problem. I think Kant kind of, influenced morality, and he kind of made it into the big deal that it's become, and it's part of the reason that, communism's become so powerful and popular. Because morality is a term that is incredibly vague, and the meaning ascribed to it can be very, very subjective because nobody really understands what morality means. And you get into this problem of understanding morality. What is morality? Well, morality can only go two paths. It can only go two paths. And this is definitive. It can only go a practical route, a consequentialist route, or it can go a rule-based route, which is a deontological route. And these routes lead to different things that people value. One is intrinsic goodness, which is what most people think.
Virtue.
Virtue ethics falls into consequentialism or deontology. Only one of them. It can't fall into another category.
How is it? Okay, well, it's not a rule-based system, right? Because it's not. The rule. I mean, unless you interpret the rule to be you ought act virtuous, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that is the. But it's not. But that is up to an individual interpretation. So
yeah, exactly. So let me ask you this, Scott.
How you define that is okay. Yeah, I'm thinking.
Yeah, let me ask you this.
I'm plugging in what you're thinking.
I think this will help you out. When you look at the two perspectives of virtue ethics, there's two routes it can go down. Either one, virtue ethics is good because it has a good outcome on your behavior. It makes your life better. Right. The other route is this. Virtue ethics is good because the behavior itself is good intrinsically. It is a good behavior to do.
Yeah.
So it can only go
fine.
down.
I don't know that. I mean, when you say it can only go down two paths, and then you say deontology or consequentialism, I think you might be wrong there because virtue ethics is obviously not deontological. But it is its own.
It has to be
thing.
one of them.
But you can say that it's a self-imposed rule. I guess. I mean, like, I don't want to die on this hill. Like, it doesn't sound right to me. Like, I think we ought to use a different word than deontological at that point, right?
Well, Scott, the funny thing is
rule based. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, because obviously, like, so many people would disagree with it in the principle that it hasn't been framed that way before. But I don't know that you're necessarily wrong in stating it's either rules that you impose or it's values and consequences. I'm fine with that. I just don't know that I like using a word that is like one of the three major branches and then saying all the other branches fit under that word. I think you might need a new word or something.
It's just funny because so Scott, like I really did get into like the philosophy of libertarianism, and I got into philosophy in general, and when I was discovering all this stuff, I like researched extensively, and let me tell you, I'm not the best debater, okay? I am not the best debater. But I am the king of research and studying and understanding things, concepts, and breaking them down and understanding them. That is what I excel at. I'm a great note taker. I'm a great planner. So when I
It's like
say,
half of debating, though, to be fair.
yeah, true, I'm just not really good with impromptu stuff. So I don't think I'll ever be like the most successful debater. But like, I understand the concepts that I study. And
No, no, hold on, pause. You wouldn't be good on a Twitch panel. That's not the same thing as
yeah, they're
being
pretty
a good
bad.
or bad debater, right? Like if you were to go like I mean go if you were to watch an Oxford style debate where you have an intro, right, and the other person
Yeah.
has an intro, right, and then you have like a here's my supporting evidence in 15-20 minutes, and then they do the same thing, and then here's my 15-20 minutes responding to the claims that they've made, and then they do the same thing, and then you have a closing statement, and then they have a closing statement. You'd be perfectly fine at that, right? It's just it's different. Like when you say bad at debating, I think you're talking about a new style of entertainment, right?
Online blood
That's what I do,
sports. It's
right?
kind
Like
of
online
redefined.
blood
Yeah.
sports is
Yeah.
is entertainment that is using the medium of debate as a means of bringing a new form of entertainment. It's reality TV for men in their mid 20s. That's what
Yeah.
it is,
And
right? And I
it's
use that as a medium to spread a message, right? But it's not really true debate in that regard.
that's no, that's fair. I was kind of redefining the idea of debate. And to be fair, like debate has been redefined in the last, 5 years, 10 years, on the online sphere because it's so
Yeah,
heavily,
it's just a
um,
new form of debate that is popular,
yeah,
you know?
yeah, exactly.
I just want to say, like, don't shit on yourself and say you're bad at debating, just because you're not good at interrupting, being an asshole, and making
True.
jokes that make the other person look bad. None of which are arguments, right?
Yes, exactly. My arguments are undefeatable, and that's why I think if you adopt my arguments, you will be a god on earth. Like actually, so that's why you should accept all my axioms and all my logical processes, and you will be undefeatable. Like I guarantee it. But it's like it is just true that morality does
Other
have two
other
paths.
problem, other problem here, right? Winning a debate has nothing to do with the sound, very little to do with
The
the soundness
soundness and
of
the
your
validity.
arguments.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I know. That's true. But yeah, so yeah, but that aside, basically that is the two roots. So yeah, everything falls into those two categories of deontology and consequentialism. And so when you say that something's right or wrong, you are saying something is right and wrong in accordance with a framework that ascribes to a certain value. And that value
Yeah,
can be one of two things. It can be consequentialism or it can be deontology. There is no third unless you have some sort of evidence to create a new category. So that's when you say
yeah. I
actions are
mean,
right or wrong.
that's fine.
I have a problem when people say actions are right or wrong, especially when Liquid Zulu says that I can say an action is logically true or not. You can't say that. It depends on the framework, okay? For a
Right,
collectivist,
but hold on,
it's different.
but I think the Liquid Zulu's claim here, right, is that objectivism is right, that the others are wrong,
You can't
and
say right
then
in a
and right
vacuum.
and
You can't say
I
right in
would
a
I would
vacuum.
right, if you can say that, right, like I think you can say I think the problem here is that no one's going to say every single time that they make a claim, whether or not something's right or wrong. In my moral framework, my opinion is that it is wrong. Right? They're
Mm-hmm.
just going to say it's wrong because people don't speak that way. That is baked into the claim, right? Which is that claims are falsifiable, right?
Yeah.
And so now we can debate whether or not the thing is right or wrong. Now, Liquid Zulu and would claim, I don't want to put words in his mouth because he's not here, right? But I think that he would claim that there is a rational basis for objectivism, and that objectivism is grounded in logic and non-contradiction, and that many of the moral claims that other people make are um, are true by happenstance, not because of their framework, and that many of the claims that they make are false by happenstance, because they violate any rational basis for it, and if they become irrational, um, if they become irrational, then or if the claim has some, like, we have to go by claim basis, right? But if you can prove or show that there's a contradiction in the claim, then it is a false claim. It is,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't necessarily mean that the action itself is wrong, but the claim and the reasoning is false, right? So it doesn't prove the action to be wrong if you can find a contradiction in the argument. It just means that the argument for the action is wrong, right? So like if someone says, um, you know, um, God says you shouldn't steal, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can argue that like there's a problem with that, right? We can argue that like your basis for whether or not that's right or wrong is circular logic,
It's an
right?
appeal to authority.
You have no, it's an appeal to an authority, and then when you ask who that authority is, you go, well, it's God, and they go, well, prove it. And it's like, well, I believe it on faith, right? And it's like, well, like so you're appealing to an authority that is in that I'm incapable of challenging, and I'm incapable of arguing against, and then that is just, you just take that to be axiomatically true, and you have no reason, you have no sound reasoning as to why that's true. Now, I can say that their reasoning is not sound and that their justification for not stealing is not sound. But that doesn't mean that stealing is good or that stealing is amoral. I can say that to attempt to justify stealing is would be a logical contradiction in and of itself. And so to steal is to operate under the laws of the jungle. So you can't claim that stealing is good. You can claim that stealing is wrong, right? But to claim that stealing is good is to make a moral statement of, or to make an ethical statement that is a contradiction. So by nature, we're either operating in the laws of the jungle or we're operating in the realm of ethics. And in the realm of ethics, it can only be stated that stealing is wrong. There is
Mm-hmm.
no other answer to that question.
Well, actually, funny
Is
story
stealing
about
wrong?
that.
The answer must be that it is, yes, it is wrong.
Funny story about that. I've identified that there are
Mhm.
only two systems in which you can go into. In legal systems, there's only two legal systems you can have. It's voluntarism or non-voluntarism, obviously. And so non-voluntarism
Sure,
is
yeah.
just might makes right. So you can have voluntarism or you can have might makes right. And so that's basically at the end of the day the argument. I have written that down. I have every single answer to every counter argument for that specific example. But yeah, you can be voluntarist or you can have might makes right. There's no in between those two. But yeah, very interesting stuff. But unless you have something else to say about that, back to the egoist axiom. So are you an egoist now?
Go ahead. Am I an egoist?
Yeah, because I proved it, bro.
I mean, if your definition of egoism, right, is just the theory of human action, then by that definition, is the theory of human action correct? Then yeah, by that definition, I'm an egoist. Um, but I mean, I don't think that that's very helpful, right? Because like
It is helpful.
now you put me, well, I mean, sure, but like I know a ton of egoists, right? That their claim, and it's very similar with like lefty consequentialists, right? That if I do something for me, it's good, regardless of whether or not it harms others, right? That is an argument that is made many times over by Stirner, right? Like the father of egoism, right? Is that like there is no moral question about whether or not something is right or wrong in terms of, the nap or, aggression, or like he would say, Stirner would say that, I mean, like he even said at one point, right, that like, if communists took over, all of the high IQ people would, like, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said like, anyone that is, intelligent would just become a capitalist anyways. Right. That like, even though he's against capitalism, he was just basically saying, under communism, anyone intelligent would just become a capitalist, and that would be morally good. But
Yeah.
capitalism is also morally evil. It's like he falls into so many contradictions. So like I don't I would say like by that definition, sure, I'm an egoist. I have no problem with that. My issue is claiming the title of egoism because it's a dangerous thing for me to do in the sense that it's tied to a bunch of really bad ideas. It's similar to anarchism, but anarchism is a fight I'm willing to have. Egoism isn't. I don't put like a large stock in reclaiming that to mean the definition that you're presupposing.
Speaking of anarchism, if you Google the definition of anarchism, the second definition proves anarcho-capitalists are the true anarchists. It says
I mean,
associating
sure.
in a voluntary, a system of voluntary hierarchies or something like that. So like anarchists are the true, anarcho-capitalists are the true anarchists by
Yeah, I mean,
definition.
I tend to use Chomsky's definition from like his On Anarchism in 2005, right? Which is that anarchism is about, you know, the destruction of unjustified hierarchies, right? And so it's like, you know, and then
Mm-hmm.
he kind of tried to bridge the gap between the lefties and the righties here, and they hated him for it, right? But like, it's like, yeah, well, what is an unjustifiable hierarchy? Like, you know, I would say, you know, I would say the ANCOMs and those people are creating unjustifiable hierarchies in their attempt to destroy all hierarchy. Um, but like, yeah, like I would say, yeah, I'm fine with that, right? Like that's a fight that I'm willing to have, and the reason that's a fight I'm willing to have is because I value Benjamin Tucker, I value Lysander Spooner, I value Voltairine de Cleyre, I value Josiah Warren, I value Proudhon and Bellegarou and Sade, right? Like I value these people and the things that they made, and to me, the modern anarchist that is usually of the left wing commie variety has shit on the theories, work, and meaning behind, you know, the early anarchist philosophers and thinkers, and has recontextualized and rewritten history. And I want to resurrect those things as foundational in the learning process as we discovered, you know, true anarchism. Um,
Yeah,
and
that's fair.
so that's something to me that's worth fighting for. So I'll take that label despite all the bad shit it's tied to. What I won't do is take egoism, because I have no value in it in trying to what, like, resurrect Stirner. You know what I mean? Like it's like fuck Stirner. I mean, he's
That's
got some
fair.
good
No,
works.
yeah,
He's got some
I
good
don't blame you.
writings. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's kind of how I am.
that's fair. That's fair. Okay, so the two corollaries to the egoist axiom are consequentialism and determinism. It's going to be very self-evident, very
Wait,
similar.
what do you mean? What do you mean here? Explain this.
Okay, so the two corollaries are consequentialism, determinism. First one's consequentialism. Basically, it's just the idea that the self acts to achieve what it values most at any given time, right? So valued outcomes drive actions. Do valued
So
act?
well, I don't. It seems like you're restating the other. What is the principal difference between saying that humans are rational actors, or that humans always act according to their, you know, selfish values and desires, and then that people act in accordance to their values to achieve their desired consequences? What is the
Because
principal difference between these three things?
because if you believe that actions drive valued outcomes, then that's consequentialist in nature. Because consequentialism is all about achieving actions via
Right,
any means
but
necessary.
consequentialism is saying whether or not it's right or wrong. I mean, like I'm trying
No,
to understand the
consequentialism is
right, like,
value based. Consequentialism is value based, not moral based.
okay, so okay, hold on. You're saying that consequentialism is not moral based, that it has nothing to say about what's right or wrong.
Nothing. Dude, I figured this out. It's fucking insane. You wouldn't believe it. It's
I don't.
actually true. I can go through it
Okay,
if you want.
I mean, I would like you to go through it, but hear me out before you go through it. It seems like you're redefining consequentialism, right? Like even if you can prove that, you know, prove that it is true, that it is how that is enacted, or in you know, how it is pragmatically, or how it is in reality, right? That would still, you would still need like a new name, or like you know, like you would be presenting a theory of how consequentialism acts in practice, as opposed to what the claim is in philosophy of what consequentialism is. Like if I talk to
Mhm.
any philosophy professor or PhD, they're not going, like, I highly doubt I'll find too many of them whom's claim is that consequentialism has nothing to say about what is right or what is wrong, right? Like they would all say that yes, consequentialism says this action is wrong because of the outcomes, or says that this action is right and that you ought to do this thing because of the consequences. I'd love to hear your argument, you know, and I'll listen,
Mhm.
right? But I feel like again, I feel like you're now talking about a new thing, right? You're talking about how it works in practice, as
Yeah.
opposed to the claim.
No, you're absolutely right. It is a new thing, and this is what's fucking hilarious about philosophy. Is like, in a lot of ways, philosophy is a big scam because it's hidden by so many sophistic languages, and by sophists themselves. So they try to hide the truth of philosophy with like big words and stuff, and that way you can't get to the true meaning of the ideas. But it's so funny that for so long people have tied consequentialism to moral basis, but this defeats the entire idea of moral bases. When we're talking about moral bases, we're talking about moral intrinsicism. We're talking about the intrinsic goodness of a property or a decision. This is what deontology is all about. It is all about the intrinsic worth of the action. It's independent of humans. That's what deontology is about. So when we're speaking about morality, deontology is really the only thing what we mean by intrinsic goodness. Consequentialism is the opposite of intrinsic goodness because you are breaking the rules which are of the utmost importance to achieve another end. So I've got a shit ton of notes about this.
Well, hold on. So
Go
you're saying
ahead.
consequentialism is breaking the rules, but I mean,
Yeah.
if you're a consequentialist, right, or like a pure consequentialist, right,
hmm
are you really breaking the rules, or are you just saying that those rules are invalid, that those aren't like that those rules don't matter, right? That those rules, I mean, like, and then of course, obviously, there is like the love child of deontology and consequentialism, right? Which is rules based consequentialism, right? Like that weird
Which is
marriage of like,
bullshit. It's not real. It's bullshit.
yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I agree. I mean, like, I think what you're saying, it's fine if you say that, like, these things tend to converge, right? And so therefore, this seems to be a thing that we choose to adopt as a rule because it seems that every time you violate this rule, it leads to bad outcomes. I don't actually think it's that bullshit. I just again, I think all consequentialism and is bullshit when it attempts to justify things that are illogical, right?
hmm
But outside of that domain, I don't necessarily have that much of an issue with rules based consequentialism.
Okay.
It does seem like a cope, but I mean, but I don't necessarily have a problem with it. Okay,
Yeah,
so
that's fair.
the argument is consequentialism isn't following any set guidelines of rules. And so
hmm
because it's not following any set guidelines of rules, it is um it is by definition not a moral framework because it's not universalizable. Like I'm not sure I'm getting the argument.
Well, that's fine. I was kind of just summarizing. I was summarizing it. I'm gonna go into the points now. But that was kind of like an overall kind of summary of like the idea. So the idea is that consequentialism is value based because number one, it has a dependence on human centric standards. Okay, so this essentially means that actions are evaluated on good or desirable outcomes, and these judgments they stem from values. Okay, that's how they
Okay.
figure out what's
Well, I
up.
mean, is that true, or is it just true
Yes.
that humans are the only known moral actors as of yet?
Well, let
Like
me ask you something.
if aliens came here, right, and they were capable of communicating with us, and they were capable of proving that they were moral actors, right? That aliens came here and they said, it's wrong to steal, so in our society we don't steal. And when someone does steal, we punish them, right? So now they've proven, or at least they appear to have proven, right? We're going to assume that they're not like AI machine robots that are, mimicking it, right? Like they appear to have proven that they are capable of making moral claims and then acting upon those moral claims as beliefs, and therefore they are moral actors. Wouldn't most, if not all, consequentialists then include this new alien species? So I don't know that it's necessarily intrinsic human value so much as it is the value of individuals that are capable of acting morally or moral actors, right?
Right. Well, it is funny that consequentialism always derives their value from something that is tied to humanity, and that's not the case for moral intrinsicism, which ties their values to something higher than humanity, something objective. But with consequentialism, what they'll say is they're justifying their ethics by pointing to some sort of desirable outcome. But the thing is, how do they figure out what the good is of their outcome? They have no justification for it, similar to the deontologists.
Yeah, I mean, but again, objectivists are I would say under the framework of consequentialism.
Yes.
Right.
Correct.
And they do have a justification for how they arrive to it, right? Like it's what is good is what is within one's own, is an individual acting upon their own rational self-interest.
Yeah, but their justification isn't deductive. Their justification is value-based. They value well-being and they are willing to enact in the consequentialist framework. So they're not deriving their ideology deductively. They're doing it inductively.
Okay. So you're saying that the objectivism is working backwards. It's assuming a value, you think?
So, yeah, I went down the objectivist rabbit hole, and they have the greatest axioms of any ideology. They have the greatest axioms, that is for certain. But the problem is, what's his name? Pickard, the successor to Ayn Rand. The successor to Ayn Rand.
Leonard Peikoff.
Leonard Peikoff. He makes a jump. He says that he can prove that logical axioms can make a case to capitalism, but he makes a jump somewhere. I forget where, it's been so long, but he does make a jump at some point. And so their axioms, which is their deductive reasoning, is separate from their values, which is their inductive reasoning. And their values are on the well-being of people. And so with their value in mind, they have identified the correct, by the way, everybody wants well-being, but the objectivists are uniquely correct in their methodology to achieving well-being, which is capitalism. That's their methodology.
Okay.
So all consequentialists, or most consequentialists, value well-being. That's pretty much everybody's standard of what they value. But the objectivists, yeah, their methodology is for that. But that's
okay. But you're saying there isn't a deductive argument for objectivism, and I don't understand why you're saying
there isn't.
Why is it that you're saying? So why are you saying that it? So like if we go, all right. So let's walk through this. So existence exists, right?
Mm-hmm.
So far, axiom 1, good, right? Unavoidable axiom.
Yep.
Right. And then right, like we move into the law of identity, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, they would do
right?
primacy of
so
consciousness
far,
and identity, but I mean, I don't know the order of that, but yeah, they do those three.
Well, yeah. So I mean, primacy of what's not? It's a primacy of existence, I think.
Existence, consciousness, and identity.
Right, but existence exists is the unavoidable axiom that is showcasing that it's not primacy of consciousness.
Yes.
Right. Like existence exists. You can't argue against it. You exist. You exist in a material world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we move into law of axiom 2, if you will, the law of identity, right?
A thing is itself.
So far, right? The thing is itself. A equals A, right? And then, consciousness exists, and that's what sees existence.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You need a consciousness in order to perceive existence. If you're a blind, if you're a rock, you can't perceive existence.
Yeah.
Okay. And then so then we link it, right? So 1 is existence exists, right? And then 2 is law of identity. So, so if something exists, it must be it must have an identity, right? It must be something, an individual thing in its existence, right? And then linking, I guess what 2 is. Let me write this down. 1 is existence, 2 is identity, 3 is consciousness. Then premise 1 links existence to identity, right? Premise 2 is linking would link itself to link 3, axiom 3 to axiom 2. So consciousness to identity, and of course as well existence, right? So premise 2 is consciousness that is how we perceive existence and identity, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just writing down the axioms, and I'm trying to proof it out, right? And so reality is the sum, or like the total existence itself, like the reality that we live in is the total of all of these things, right?
Right.
Or at least premise one and premise two, right? So reality is the sum of all perceivable um existence and in things with identities. Okay, so all of that's deductive, right? Like we're good, right?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, so then let's get to the conclusions. So conclusion would then be I don't know, let me look at chat. Chat's going crazy. Evolutionary capitalism showed back up. He's one of the few people banned
Evolutionary
from my Discord.
Bro, I saw
He's
your
one of the
debate
few
with
people
him.
that's been banned. He's one of the few people that have been banned from my Discord because like he just can't relax. Like he's like, you're like, hey man, relax, stop, and he can't stop. All right,
Yeah.
so sorry. So premise one, existence is premise, or sorry, axiom one, existence. Axiom two, identity. Axiom three is consciousness. Premise one, existence and identity are linked. Premise two, consciousness is how we perceive identities and existence. And then premise three, reality is everything that exists. Is, you know, reality is the grand total of existence, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and that those things are perceivable.
Yeah.
So conclusion one would be reality is objective, right?
Right.
Reality is an objective truth, and that and the reason for that is that everything that exists in reality is separate from our consciousness, because our consciousness is what perceives reality, right?
Right.
That's conclusion one. So reality exists. There is an objective reality
Mm-hmm.
that is true. Conclusion two, and this is the important one, right? Conclusion two would be, because consciousness is what grasps reality, because consciousness is what sees reality and can conceive of it and measure it, etc. An objective reality, and because an objective reality exists that is seen by consciousness, then consciousness, or then reality, all of existence and all of the things that are, can be known and perceived and evaluated by reason.
Yeah, I guess that's fair.
Right? So I would say, there you go. There's the deductive, argument that reality is objective and that reality can only be perceived and measured through reason from a conscious being. A conscious being that has the capacity for reason can and is the only means by which we can perceive and know reality. And so, right, like, so I mean, that's the
Yeah.
fundamental
Well, so
basis.
you've
So
proven
so
a lot of important things. You've proven that rationality exists, but the big thing is you
mhm.
have to prove that rationality somehow um it leads to capitalism as like a corollary. Like that's the big jump that needs to be made.
Okay, so the next thing that well, I was like, I'm not proving all of objectivism. I was just trying to
Well,
get through a deductive argument of objectivism. You were saying that like it's
yeah.
not founded on deductive reasoning, right?
No, 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 no.
So what
So
belief is not founded on deductive
the
reasoning?
first half is absolutely founded deductively. The second half isn't.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying. Um, So like I said before,
So the second
objectivism
half is what?
has the greatest axioms like of all of all like studies of academics. It has the greatest axioms. It has the most insight for deductive reasoning. The problem is there's a jump made to capitalism. That's all I was saying.
Okay, so the jump is between reality exists and reality must be perceived by humans, or not humans but conscious beings, right? Like obviously there could be other conscious beings that can perceive reality, um,
Yeah.
and then they can know it and measure it with reason. Reason is the means by which we do it, right? So then you're saying, where do we get from there to capitalism is good?
Or capitalism, yes, capitalism is like the right thing to do. I don't think there is a way to get there.
I don't think there is a right way to get there purely from objectivism. I think you need, I think you need, I think from here, right? From here, we've, 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 we've established humans and we've established reality and we've established that reality can only be known from reason. I
Mhm.
think you need the ANCAP portion in argumentation ethics, right? That if you're going to make an ethical framework, it can't be through theft and coercion. That's
Yes,
where
but
you get
the
that's
problem with
that's where
argumentation
you get the
ethics,
capitalism.
the problem with argumentation ethics is it relies on a value system, right? So you can value might makes right, and lots of leftists do value might makes right. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong. It just means that they value might makes right.
Okay, they can value might makes right. Yeah, but is the value it is wrong if they say that that is how we ought um engage in an ethical framework, right? Like yeah, people value bad things,
Mm-hmm.
right? Without a doubt, right? Like a rapist values taking, the woman or the man by own his own force, right? But if the
Mm-hmm.
rapist attempts to say we ought to have a society where we rape everybody whenever we want, like, and that's and right, like that claim is wrong. That claim is
Wait,
illogical.
Scott, do you think value is subjective?
Yeah, I think value is subjective. Absolutely,
Can value be wrong?
absolutely.
Wait. You just said value
Well,
is subjective.
the value that they have, right, can't be wrong. You're correct, right? Like you know, I can value evil things, um, but can they be proven to be wrong as a value, um, from AE's perspective, right? So I sorry, sometimes I have to switch between the two, and my brain gets in like two different
Mm-hmm.
modes, right? Like there's an objectivist mode and then there's like a libertarian mode. So
Yeah,
from a
sure.
libertarian mode, the value itself is not wrong, right? Like the
Right.
value is just a value. It's a subjective value,
Correct.
right? The
Correct.
claim that the value is good, that we ought aggress can be wrong, but the internal value of like sex as your highest value over someone else's bodily autonomy is not wrong from the natural law perspective. I think it absolutely is wrong to value um, sex over bodily autonomy, right? I think that those values are dysgenic and dysfunctional and unhelpful towards your own rational self-interest. And by doing so and valuing one thing over the other, um, you, like it depends on what I guess it depends on what you mean by value, right? Like if you
It
take the
depends on your value
value
system.
as like right, well, no, I think it depends on like if you're just taking an internal value of like sex versus bodily autonomy, right? I can value sex more than bodily autonomy, right? But that isn't
But you're not wrong
right. Like
in doing
again,
that.
it's complicated, right? Because like when we talk about values, we're talking about values separated from action, right? So the action can be wrong, the argumentation to justify the action can be wrong, but the value itself isn't. I'm struggling to determine whether or not the value itself as itself is wrong. And I would say in order for the value itself to be wrong, the value would have to be valuing a certain action, right? Does that make sense? So like valuing sex as your like major thing is not wrong. It's not wrong to value sex as like the thing you desire more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not valuing sex, but you're valuing taking sex by force, that is a wrong value. And it's wrong because once you attempt to justify it to others, we can prove that that justification is incorrect. Does that make sense, right?
No,
Like, so
it
like
does make
valuing
sense,
sex,
but like, okay, the problem is all actions are neutral, and I know this is getting into like no, they're not territory.
well, it depends on what you mean, right? Like, I mean, I've recognized this long in the conversation that I
Yeah,
need you to explain what you mean when you use
fair
words,
enough.
because you use words that like other people use with different meanings often.
Yes,
But I get you're
that
just
is
trying to
true.
explain
That is
difficult
true.
concepts.
Yes. But this is my big problem with the things you're saying, and I don't want to keep going in circles around this for too long because I think we just fundamentally disagree on this. But when you say something is right or wrong, you there must be some mechanism to measure if something is right or wrong. And you can either have an objective or subjective measurement system. Is that fair?
Yeah. Well, when I say something is wrong, I often mean it in two different ways, right? So when I say something is wrong, I might mean that it's factually incorrect in
Mm-hmm.
the sense that it's logically unjustifiable.
Mm.
Or I might mean that it's wrong in the sense that like I think that it's evil or that you ought not do something or that you ought not
Yeah, that's morally
hold a
wrong.
certain value. Right. Like right. So like it depends on so when I say something's wrong, I often right like and maybe I ought to be better about communicating that, but I'm already too fucking verbose. You know what I mean?
That's yeah. No, that's actually why I hate the word right and wrong in like a moral context because it has double meanings, like you said. Like
Yeah.
the thing about right and wrong is usually talking about something that is a factual statement. It's a truth statement, right? But there's true statements and then
Yeah.
there's value statements. And I guess when you are talking about deontology, you would consider it a truth statement. But when you're talking about consequentialism, it would be a value statement. So it does get
But
very
even then,
confusing.
but even then, there's a truth statement implied, right? Because there's a premise snuck into saying that's wrong. And the premise snuck in is under my value system, I believe that to be wrong. But nobody says that because that's weird and verbose, right? So it is a truth statement about in a way of like what it is that you believe. And so there's a problem there, obviously, because like if you break down the sentence, it's a bad sentence. But like communication via language is narrative based, right? And so like you things get lost in all communication, right? It's not the same thing as writing out a proof. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's true.
But right. So like what I would say is like, you know, values are subjective. And so to claim that a value is wrong, you need to have I agree with you. You need to have some basis for why it's wrong. And
Mm-hmm.
when I claim that a value is wrong, I'm claiming only it's wrong if the attempt to justify said value would um would would lead to logical contradiction. Right? So internally there's no contradiction. But the moment you try and say that it's right and you try and argue for it, a contradiction arises, right? So I would say, therefore, the value itself is wrong. Now, again, when I say the value, I don't mean valuing sex, valuing money, you know, like things like that. I mean
Do you mean moral
valuing
value?
policy, right? Like valuing doing an action, valuing things like that. And to an
Yeah.
extent, those kind of aren't values; those are beliefs. Those are moral beliefs as opposed to values, right? So, like, I would actually separate those and say that a value is, you know, like moral beliefs are a different type of value, and that those can be wrong, whereas a pure value, if you want to use that phrase, right, a value of like I like this thing, this material thing, I desire this material thing, or I right like or I desire this gaining of this material thing is not wrong, right? Or like I value this liberty or this freedom or this concept is unlikely to be wrong. I don't know. I'd have to clean it up. You know what I mean? I'd have to think about it more because I haven't really
Yeah.
thought about it this way.
Hmm.
I don't think, or if I have, it's been brief. But I get what you're saying, right? Like if I value sex as my highest value, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like, or at the very least, I can't prove that there's anything wrong with that, either from an objectivist frame point or from a libertarian
Right.
framework. So Christian might say that, right? Like going back to the deontological systems, right, where there are rules or oughts, might say that's evil because family ought be your highest value, second to God, who should be your highest value. Like they might say that holding one value over another is sacrilegious because there are rules about what you ought value. But from an objectivist, or as you're putting it into two domains, a consequentialist framework with the kind of the rules based, this other thing, right, this principled libertarian other thing, which is this, I believe, deductive theory of law that proves certain things unjustifiable, could be wrong. But yeah, like I think, yeah, I'm getting into the weirdness.
I think we're
Expected value
maximally
does
in the
not equal
weirdness.
value. Yeah, it's the stream is titled libertarian theory,
For
and
nerds.
the thumbnail to the video before you click on the video is libertarian nerd night, I think is what I
Yeah,
wrote.
I saw. I
So
saw.
like,
It's
yeah, like
great.
this is meant to be a heady discussion. It's not meant to be like a debate bro panel. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I guess I get what you're saying to a certain degree. My issue is I'd have to go back through the proofs of objectivism, because I don't have it written out anywhere and I can't definitively claim one way or the other whether or not there isn't a full deductive argument for the moral realist
The
hypothesis,
logical case for
theory, or
capitalism.
fact, right, for well, that man ought act in his own rational self-interest. I can
Yeah.
say definitively that capitalism is the only economic system by which that adheres to the non-aggression principle, right?
Hmm.
And so, and I can say definitively that if you attempt to justify any other form of any other economic system, that you're wrong, you're falling into logical contradiction, and therefore you can't justify any other economic system, that you can only just be an irrational beast that is outside of the domain of morality. You have chosen to separate yourself from making moral claims and being a moral actor. So the only thing that can be morally true is capitalism, because it is the only economic system that doesn't violate the non-aggression principle. Now, however, right, that doesn't mean you can't live in a voluntary society that's a commune, right? And effectively engage in your own form of socialism that's perfectly voluntary within the bounds of like the land that is yours. And then like, right, like you're not really engaging in capitalism as we think of it as an economic theory, right? But you are, from like a definitional standpoint, engaging in capitalism in the sense of like you're respecting private property rights, and everything that is occurring, every economic transaction that's occurring is voluntary, right?
Yeah, capitalism's the
It's just that you've all
foundation.
voluntarily chose, right? You've kind of all voluntarily chose to live in a commune, and so like you're effectively recreating communism, right? And so like to call that capitalist is kind of silly, but like definitionally speaking, it is capitalism if you're respecting private property rights, and you're, all of the exchanges of labor and services and goods and property is voluntary.
Yeah, that's true. I would disagree with what you said about somebody being wrong about their value system. I would say that you can say someone is wrong or right if you have an internal critique within their value system and say, if a
True.
if a communist was to say communism I value well-being, and communism is the best way to well-being. You could say, no, you're wrong, because communism, by your value system, is not the best way to well-being. If you wanted to have the best methodology or the best method
Oh yeah,
to well-being, that would be
that's true.
capitalism. So you can be
Yeah,
wrong
you can do
in
an
your
internal critique.
yeah, exactly.
You can do an internal critique, but the problem with doing an internal critique like that is that, like, rhetorically it works, but technically what you're showing is not that their values are wrong. You're just actually illuminating what their real values are.
Yeah, but that's the problem.
Right?
You can't tell them that their values are wrong because value is subjective.
Right. But what
And
I'm saying is
yeah.
that if you do an internal critique and they say, I value A, I value B, I value C in that order. And therefore we ought to do this to reach the outcome of my values in order A, B, and C. And then I can say, you can do one of two things, right? You can prove, probably unlikely with consequentialism, because it requires you to, it requires you to know the future, right? So you can't ever know the future. So you can never unequivocally prove, unless there's some contradiction, right, that those actions won't lead to those things. So if there's no contradiction, there's just a guess, right? Then you could convince them that it won't lead to that. But the other thing you could do in this instance is you could show by the decisions that they make that they don't actually value A, B, and C in that order.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Like
Performative contradiction.
That their stated values, right? That their stated values aren't their actual values. Those are just what they believe their values are, or they're lying about them.
Exactly. And I would just say to everybody who like listens to Liquid Zulu, when he says that there's a contradiction, there's never a contradiction in your action. Your action is true. Your action is what it is. Your action can't be a contradiction. Your action is the truth. Your words can contradict your action, and in which case you'd be doing a performative contradiction. But it's really important to say that if somebody engages in might make right, when they're acting out aggression, their action is not a contradiction in reality. It is actually happening in real time. Their espousals, their words can contradict their behavior, but behavior cannot contradict itself.
Yeah, I use this quote because it's my favorite Ayn Rand quote ever, all the time. Right? It's repeated multiple times in Atlas Shrugged. The first time you hear it is from Francisco d'Anconia. I think it's how you say his name. I don't fucking know. It's a complicated ass fucking South American fake name. But it's like an Italian immigrant or some shit, if I remember correctly.
Bro, you know the most random shit.
We're talking about objectivism.
I'm kidding, bro. Go ahead. I'm kidding.
I just remember from the book, like his granddad was came over and like built a fortune to bring a woman over, like the woman that he loved, right? And like built a fortune so that she would come over and love him or whatever.
There's probably a flashy title.
That's how the empire started. So contradictions do not exist. Whenever you think you are facing a contradiction, check your premises. You will find that one of them is wrong.
That's a good quote.
Yeah, so exactly as you were saying though, right? Like from the Randian perspective, it's not a real contradiction because the action is the truth, right? It's the contradiction that exists doesn't exist in reality. It exists in the lie that's being told, either intentionally or unintentionally, when the person makes a claim that contradicts their actual actions. Right? I value this, and then the actions prove that they don't value it. Right? The contradiction is inherent in the claim. The action is just reality. It's a false premise, and the false premise is that I value X, and it's proven false by their actions.